At the time, I was like, this is a bad idea, but hey, I'm just some E5 sergeant. I don't know what's going on. Surely somebody else has a plan. The longer I was there, I was like, well, there is no plan here. And the more ground level truth that we give to these decision makers, they don't seem to be adjusting course at all. And then I watched us just pour more and more resources into Iraq when that seemed like the wrong thing to do. But it seems like all these different traditional pillars of masculinity are places where boys could go to forge character and get some responsibility. It's like one door after another is closing for them, and they're getting put. It's like, well then, but why don't you just play a video game? Why don't you just
it's
get
so
on
interesting
TikTok?
because in the Slavic community, Andrei Ivanov, probably heard of Flash Love.
Definitely.
They're kind of supplementing. We do have a couple board members on our team that are actually running right now, or city councils and whatnot. So we're starting small.
That's good.
And it's not the fact that, hey, the Russians are taking over, which is probably not a good thing right now.
They were supposed to be out of Syria by Christmas Eve of 2018, and so they ended up staying. And then on just a month later, about a month after the order was given, her and 3 other Americans were killed just by a suicide bomber. The reason why Putin's emboldened to do this is because America is weak right now. The reason why Putin can afford this is because we killed off the U.S. energy sector, and then we actually greenlit the pipeline that just mysteriously blew up. Congress, who are authorizing this money, that are saying, well, we're at war with Russia. It's like, well, wait a sec. We didn't vote on a war with Russia. Like, that rhetoric is just completely and totally ridiculous, and it's dangerous. And then we're bragging. We have our intelligence community bragging that, hey, we're providing targeting data to kill Russian generals. Okay, so now we're admitting that we're killing Russians. Like, how much can we help other countries when our country's in this way? When our southern border is wide open, and there's 4 million illegal immigrants that have come into our country. There's enough fentanyl coming into our country to kill every American 3 or 4 times over. The DEA just released a bulletin from Multnomah County that says, like, there's fentanyl shaped as lollipops and Skittles right now, Republicans and independents who don't trust our election system. And I think that's very dangerous. I think this is probably something that the Slavic community, or really any immigrant community, has a greater understanding than native-born Americans. Like, we have something very special here where we get to pick the people that have power over us. But bottom line, make sure you're registered to vote. Make sure you have a plan to vote by November 8th. Thank you very much, and God bless.
All right. Yaroslav, do you have anything else to add? Joe, thank you for being here. How are you feeling today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, you've been campaigning for what, second year now? Is it second
pretty
year?
much. This is about like 19 months or so. We've been at it. Yeah.
That's a long time. The most campaigns, I know there's some campaigns just started a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
You have been campaigning for, like I said, about 19 months, you said. Yeah. And it's been a long, long time. And I know we've been following you as well, and following other candidates, and it's been a very interesting election. And this is... we've been talking about it, and I know you've talked about it. This is going to be probably the most important election of our lifetime, and probably your lifetime as well. Certainly. Because you're actually on the ballot this time. So it's going to be exciting. Well, I always like to just have our candidates briefly talk about themselves and kind of share their life story and kind of what drove them to actually want to run, and just in general. But before we do that, really quick, I usually want to have, if you can quickly, for those listeners maybe tune in for the first time, and they don't know who is Slavic Vote and what we do, would love to do a quick introduction of Slavic Vote. Yaroslav?
Yeah, you'd think people would be bored by now because we say it so many times. But
yes, but we always have new listeners.
Yeah, so. We always have new people that come up and they're like, what is Slavic Vote? What are you guys about? We're, I think, our 4th year in already.
Yep.
We're having birthdays now, so I guess we're growing.
Yes.
So the first couple of years initially we realized as we got together is that the Slavic community, a lot of them were not registered. And not being registered was a huge issue, which took us about 2 years to get over that hurdle. And then we realized most people didn't vote, and to begin with was because they didn't know who to vote for. Mm-hmm. Because opening up the ballot book a lot of times is more confusing than probably reading an encyclopedia for some people. Even English-speaking people are like, wow, what is this all about? Yep. And then when the ballots actually come out, it's even more confusing. Yep. You need a lawyer next to you if you want to do that, and to explain which way you're voting, even if you do understand what they're talking about. So I think what we ended up tackling is the education part was the number 2 issue. And then number 3 was actually activation. Mm-hmm. And this is what the stage we're in right now. We do have a couple of board members on our team that are actually running right now. or city councils and whatnot. So we're starting small.
That's good.
And it's not the fact that, hey, the Russians are taking over, which is probably not a good thing right now. It's not the whole thing about Slavics or... the thing is we're trying to get our communities to actually be involved in their communities, because the Russian community or the Slavic community has been so enclosed over the years. Like, I've been here since '89, and we started voting when Slavic vote started, pretty much. Wow. So that's what, like almost 20 something years, almost 30 years. Yeah. And we found a lot of people were in the same boat. Mm-hmm. And then we invite really interesting people like yourself to explain to us why should we even get into politics. Right. So that's kind of our story and where we began and what we do.
Awesome. Yes. Awesome. Thank you. Well, if you can, jump in into just really your where you grew up and kind of your life story as you grew up, and kind of what life stories that led you to do what you do. I know you've been serving in the Army for a long time, and that's takes not a lot of people are in doesn't make that choice. So I'm curious what led you to want to even serve in the military. And I know our Slavic community is I think a majority of them don't believe in serving, or they grew up believing that it's not the right thing for a believer. So it's a very unique thing, and there's a very handful of people that I know that served from the Slavic community. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah. So actually I grew up not too far from here. So I grew up in Southwest Portland. Mm-hmm. I like to caveat that with Portland of the 80s and 90s, kind of before Portland lost its mind. So I felt like I had a very normal childhood living in the suburbs. I think really formative for me was obviously my parents and my faith. Great, strong family. I'm the first of 5 kids. So big family, really strong faith community. But I got really heavily involved in Boy Scouts when I was a young kid. So we can talk about Boy Scouts later, what's happened to Boy Scouts ever since. Yes. But I was in a very traditional and very unique, I think, Boy Scout troop. I had a couple veterans as my scout leaders. And really, when I think back on the stuff they used to let us go do as unsupervised, like children and teenagers, like I'm amazed that like the parents nowadays, I think that, the cops would get called on them. But we were out shooting guns and hunting and, building forts and beating each other up and doing all the cool stuff that boys should be doing out in the woods. So that was really formative for me. I didn't have much interest in school. I like sports. I like wrestling. I like football. I liked U.S. history, but I just didn't. Going to college for me, even though that was all that was really being told to us at the time, was like, hey, you need to go to college. You need to go to college. I had zero desire. And so I think basically from the time I was a really little boy I was like, I want to be a soldier, a commando of some sort, watching G.I. Joe and all that. But then as I got older, read a bunch of books. This is pre-internet, being in the house and all that. So read books on the Vietnam War, on Special Forces, Navy SEALs, all that. And then when I was about 13 years old, there was the famous Black Hawk Down incident, and that was the way, like right around the same time that Americans started getting cable TV. Or I guess cable TV hit the entire world.
What year is that again?
93. Yeah, and so I think the violence from Mogadishu was probably the first like really well televised and documented combat that had been filmed before, and kind of piped in live into people's houses. And so I was 13, and I was watching these young guys, like their dead bodies tragically getting drugged through the streets. There was a massive firefight, and so I was like, this is crazy. These guys, probably just a couple of years ago, were living in a community just like me. They're probably playing football, wrestling, and Boy Scouts or whatever, and then they found themselves over there. And so I was like, okay, whoever those guys are, I want to go do that. Because if there's someone from my country that has to go do this, I want to be the guy that goes and does it. So enlisted right in the Army right when I turned 18, went to Ranger Regiment. It was actually the Ranger Regiment and some other special operations guys who were in that firefight in Mogadishu. So got stationed up at Fort Lewis up the road. I was lucky. So a lot of people from the South, I think the Midwest, joined the Army for some reason. And so nobody wanted to get stationed on the West Coast. And I was like, I'll go back to the West Coast in a heartbeat. So did my first couple of years at Fort Lewis. This is obviously pre-9/11. So we trained a lot. Very grateful for the time I had in Ranger Regiment, but I wanted to leave and go do something different. So Special Forces, at the time, you couldn't enlist and go right into Special Forces. You had to be in the Army for a little bit. And at the time, Special Forces were the only guys that were kind of like going out and doing stuff here and there, kind of in other countries. And Green Berets, their whole thing is they go and they train, foreign military groups, foreign militias, resistance organizations. They get to learn a language. They get to learn a culture. So that really appealed to me. So went. And I was actually in Special Forces selection, the selection process you go through when 9/11 happened. So it takes about a year and a half to earn your Green Beret. And so it took me about another year and a half to get to an actual operational group. And when I got there, I thought I had missed the war because I missed the initial push into Afghanistan. I missed the initial ground war into Iraq, and so I was like, man, I'm probably never going to get to go to war because I was in training for the entire time. Mm-hmm. But right when I got to 5th Special Forces Group, they were like, no, pack your bags, we're going right back to Iraq, and so that pretty much set the trajectory for the rest of my military career. So I did 11 combat deployments. I did a bunch in Iraq, spent a lot of time there, a lot of time in Yemen, some time in Africa. So it was a formative experience. You know, it's interesting when I first went to war right after 9/11, I thought, okay, the government's being completely honest with us, and all these guys they're terrorists that are going to come to America and do the next 9/11. You know, I really believed that. But the longer I was in Iraq, especially working at the ground level, early on, my Special Forces team got tasked with disbanding a bunch of the militias that had fought against Saddam and then forming them into an Iraqi army. And at the same time we were doing this, the U.S. government was saying that, hey, anybody who had been associated with Saddam Hussein at all was fired and basically could never hold a government job whatsoever. And I was just a E5, you know, Green Beret, 23 years old. And I was like, that seems like a really bad idea, you know, because these guys know how to run everything. Because, you know, if you ran anything in Iraqi society at the time, you were affiliated with the Ba'ath Party, you were affiliated with Saddam.
What's a Ba'ath Party?
It was the Saddam Hussein's party. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
So Ba'ath Party it's actually fairly like secular. It has a lot of like sort of communist socialism, and it's authoritarian. I mean, that's what Assad still is right now. But it was the system they had there in Iraq for a while. And so if you wanted to do anything in Iraqi society, you were technically a member of the Ba'ath Party. It was like being a member of the Communist Party in the USSR. Yeah. Like you had to be a party member. And so we basically fired everybody. And that means that the military, all the guys who knew actually how to fight, we told them they could never hold a government job again. Like, and we weren't going to pay out their pensions. Same thing with, you know, everything from the military to like the guys who knew how the sewers ran. And so we disbanded Iraqi society basically with a pinch stroke. And at the time I was like, this is a bad idea, but hey, I'm just some E5 sergeant. I don't know what's going on. Surely somebody else has a plan. The longer I was there, I was like, well, there is no plan here. And the more ground level truth that we give to these decision makers, they don't seem to be adjusting course at all. And then I watched us just pour more and more resources into Iraq when that seemed like the wrong thing to do. And what became very clear to me was that, like, number one, our decision makers, they didn't care about the direction of the war. They didn't care how many guys we lost. All they wanted to do was continue to add more troops, add more resources into the situation. And after a while, you got to think to yourself, okay, why are we doing this? At first, I thought maybe it was just incompetence. But then you're like, okay, wait, someone's benefiting from this.
When you say decision makers, do you refer to the Congress or Pentagon?
I lay the blame kind of at everyone's feet who was in leadership roles at that time, because me and my team, we weren't unique. There was a lot of us that were saying, like, hey, this is getting held together right now with glue. Like, this is not real. All the progress we're saying that we're making, just like we saw in Afghanistan, you know, just last summer, we were told right before the whole thing fell apart, you had the military, you know, telling Biden and Biden echoing, hey, the Afghan military is going to hold on for years because we trained them. We gave them billions of dollars of equipment, probably about $1 trillion or so, actually, over the course of 20 years. It's the same thing in Iraq. And so, from senior levels of the Pentagon all the way to Congress really wasn't doing their due diligence. All of them, except for a few, had voted for the Iraq war. And so a lot of them, like, they weren't going to say, like, hey, this is a disaster. They're going to be like, yeah, okay, sounds great. Let's keep sending money over there. So I got pretty skeptical of the interventionist foreign policies. I still felt that we needed people that could provide ground level truth so that a 9/11 like never happened again. But at the same time, I was really frustrated with our elected leaders, like George Bush. I was kind of done being. I'm a Republican now. I'm a Republican nominee for Congress. But after the Bush era, I was done being a Republican because I was like, all these guys want to do is the same nonsense. I knew I wasn't going to vote Democrat. I didn't like Biden. I didn't like Obama. I was kind of a Ron Paul guy at the time, but I thought Obama was at least going to change the course, because Obama ran on being, hey, I'm the anti-Bush. You know, I'm going to do things way
he said
differently.
He was going to pull all the troops out and
pull the troops out. No more new wars. You know, accountability. And then like he took the oath of office and he's like, let's find some countries to invade. You know, and it was the same exact program.
The Slavic community was kind of on the sidelines with this whole thing. I mean, not like it was affecting us directly or anything like that, but we were like, why is the U.S. taking out the counterbalance to Iran? Like, just the logic behind it.
Yeah.
But interesting to say, the military background is we had a volunteer that almost became a board member. Yeah, a very sharp guy, Ruben. He actually did his basic training, I think, took him, and then we met up with him, and he actually, I think, got invited to Special Forces because he had to move back. I think it's done here or Seattle or somewhere in this
Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Yeah.
I think he was getting invited for that. So he's kind of on the path that you're taking. If he comes over, you got to meet him up with him.
It's hard to teach people Russian. So if a native Russian speaker joins the military, like they're gonna say, hey, you're either gonna go sit with a pair of headphones on and tell us what these guys are saying, or you can go be a Green Beret.
Yeah, so. I got a joke after radio. I can tell you about that.
So what is a Green Beret? What's like the I guess what's the difference between other?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Special Forces, Green Beret. People will say Special Forces usually, and like they kind of blanket mean everything from Rangers to SEALs, but Special Forces specifically in the Army, Green Berets, and so we do everything from going in and kicking in doors and sneaking around with binoculars and all the stuff you see in the movies. But our main mission is to be regional experts in a part of the world, culture, and language, and then to be able to go and be force multipliers. So they'll send in 12 of us, and we can train a couple hundred guys, and those couple hundred guys can hopefully train a couple thousand guys to either overthrow a government that we don't like or to prop up a government that we're trying to build. That's probably been the more traditional use post 9/11. But the initial days of Afghanistan, the guys who rode in on the backs of horses, that was a handful of CIA guys, and then some Green Berets who went in and made contact with the Afghan resistance that was fighting the Taliban and gave them some supplies, some training, that type of stuff.
Well, speaking of movies, I recently watched a really good movie, and I'm curious if how accurate the interpretation of that movie did, and you might have seen it too, the American Sniper.
Oh,
have you seen that movie?
I have.
Is that a pretty accurate interpretation of kind of what's going on?
Yeah, I didn't personally know Chris Kyle. I know some of the guys are on that team, but I was in Ramadi around some of the same times that he was, and I felt like they did a really good job of just kind of capturing the vibe, I guess. Like they got the uniforms right, the talk was right. I forgot what the actor's name who plays Chris Kyle.
Yeah, I forget.
He does a really good job of he just seems like a soft operator throughout the entire thing. So I was impressed with the way they did that. Yeah.
So it's very interesting that you mentioned that being on the ground, you realize that stuff wasn't being done correctly, because I actually watched an interesting documentary where there's a bunch of stuff that was happening between the generals and whatnot, the shady stuff that they were doing there, the locals. And it was really frustrating. You can see this guy, like he's a pretty high up, I think, and he was like almost in tears in a way because of all the atrocities that he was seeing the people were doing, and he couldn't do anything about it because he felt like his hands were tied because he was there probably as more like a trainer position. So you noticed that something similar to that, to where you're like, wow, this could have been done way better. Instead of firing everybody, maybe having some kind of a filtering system or a soft transition instead of like just, you're out of a job. What else are they going to do? They're going to form their own little groups, and that's just basic logic. Yeah. But so is that what kind of got you to thinking, man, when I come home, these politicians?
No, I really didn't want anything to do with politics.
Wow.
I felt that, hey, if you have the experiences that I had, then your job was to stay there and to try and make it better. Don't just get out and complain about it. Like there's always going to be a need for us to have people that go forward and fight for our country. As much as I would like to prevent that, we always kind of need to have that. So I felt that was my role, was to be there and to be one of those guys who would speak truth to power. And I got some opportunities here and there to do so. I told you Obama was basically just a replay of the Bush years, very frustrated. When Trump came on the scene back in 2015, he really, at first I thought like everybody else did. I was like, why is the guy from The Apprentice running for president? Like that doesn't
movie star.
Like what's this dude doing? But then the first time he was on a debate stage and he went after the Bush administration, the Cheney doctrine of like going and invading foreign countries, and he pointed out the whole thing had been a scam. What do we get for it? I was like, man, this guy gets it way more than any so-called expert at the Pentagon or the State Department. And so I was a pretty early on Trump supporter. And
so that's really interesting because, I remember watching the debates too. I watched all of them probably twice. And I'm like, man, is this guy going to do half of what he did? And he ended up doing it. That's the crazy part, which is like unheard of. But from your point of view, is it just what you saw there happening in Iraq? Is that mainly because there's incompetence, the fact that the people have never been into that situation? Because with politics, a lot of the people that are in politics, they've never been in the military. They've never run operations, done stuff like that.
Yeah.
Do you think that's what was kind of the issue? Is there's a lot of bureaucracy They don't know what's going on the ground. Is it some kind of a disconnect? Or?
Yeah, I mean, for the first year, 2 years, I'd give them that pass, But after a while, when things kept getting, worse and worse, and the answer was always to add more and more, then I think, hey, you don't have the luxury of saying, like, well, I don't really understand, the military. I don't understand this problem set. Like, we're paying your salary. Congress has the ability to do oversight. Let's go look into it. But really, at the end of the day, when you just look at how many incentives there are for there always to be a conflict, it's just like one of the best ways, I think, for Washington, D.C. to take billions of dollars and send it somewhere else where there's not a lot of accountability, and then put it back into their own coffers, military-industrial complex, all that. That's why if you look at the post-9/11 military operations that have been successful, they don't get talked about very often. What we talk about is we talk about these major campaigns and how many troops we put in there, because that's where the money is. If you talk about how a handful of special forces teams and CIA guys went in and toppled the Taliban quickly, and that was the mission, was to topple the Taliban and chase bin Laden. They knew where bin Laden was, but we stopped right when he crossed the border into Pakistan, a country we still give foreign aid to. Then it was like, okay, we have to do a pause and let's bring a bunch of military folks into Afghanistan and build a government. Well, that's where the money's at. You don't want to talk about how effective it was that a handful of guys just did a small mission and took them down. It's the same thing. I mean, just recently, and I'm surprised Biden didn't take a victory lap on this, when we killed Ayman Zawahiri, the number 2 guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He was the number 2 guy during 9/11. He became the number 1 guy for all of Al-Qaeda. So he was the last big operational guy that helped plan the attacks in 9/11. We killed that guy in Afghanistan, in Kabul, but we killed him with a clean drone strike, and we did it with no U.S. boots on the ground. It was just our intelligence community that did it. But nobody's talking about that because...
Yeah, and you notice that for about 2 years, Iran was hush-hush for a lot of the stuff after that specific happened. I think in the Middle East, they do understand that kind of a heavy-foot approach. Mm-hmm. But I think on getting back to politics, I think in the Republican Party sort of gets a lot of flack because they are a little foot heavy on the war stuff.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And I kind of understand. You mentioned Ron Paul at the beginning. I was like, I love that guy just because what he talks about and his principles, especially with foreign policy, are amazing.
They are.
I think it's a playbook that we should, Democrats, Republicans, all should kind of look into and see what is really the benefit. Yeah,
Ron Paul had been saying it for a long time. Rand Paul, Pat Buchanan as well before them. Mm-hmm. And this is where you needed, I think, the blunt force trauma object that Trump is, because Trump was just like, I like those ideas. That actually makes sense to me as a business guy. But he had just the sheer force of his personality. Like, who else was he going to go after the Bushes? And he did. And now if you look at what the doctrine of the Republican Party is becoming with foreign policy, we're not all the way there yet, but it's a lot more realistic and it's a lot more restrained than it was just 10 years ago. And now the Democrats have gone to this weird place where the Democrats love war, which is kind of wild when you think about it. But Trump definitely moved. I don't think Trump ever in his lifetime, definitely, and maybe not even in our lifetimes, he's going to get the credit for that. But someday when the history's written and people can actually be objective, they're going to be like, oh, this is the guy that actually switched the foreign policy.
Yeah, I mean, the Middle East completely flipped because out of that, taking out that second guy, what ended up happening is all these Arab countries, because you have the Israel doing the Abraham Accords, right? That was just amazing because now half of the Middle East is and friends with Israel, which is amazing.
You're talking about killing Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general.
Because that came right after, because these Arab countries were like, okay, America's serious. They're they're going to want to stay somehow involved, and Trump was able to push that through, which is just a miracle in itself.
And just the beauty of him being an outsider and bringing in outsiders to say, hey, what's the old logic? And they say what the old logic is. For peace in the Middle East, and guys would always say, hey, there can never be a separate peace between Israel and the Palestinians. You have to address that first, and then maybe the rest of the Arab countries will come along. And so it was just in this stalemate of we can never get the Israelis and the Palestinians to agree on anything. But the Trump administration came in and was like, hey, these Sunni Arab countries, they fear Iran more than anything else. Iran's our enemy. Let's marry, and so the Israelis are worried about the Iranians too. Let's marry up those interests. And all of permanent Washington, D.C., all the State Department people with PhDs, they all scoffed at it and said that was a horrible idea. And then Trump and Kushner flew to the Middle East and were like, hey, you guys have a common enemy. It's Iran. If you want our help, you guys are going to lead on that. And they're all like, oh, yeah, done deal. Because they had a fresh set of outside eyes, which I really respected about the Trump administration.
Well, I appreciate those insights because I think those are a lot of things that we don't often don't often see. So thank you for that. Before I jump into some of the questions I jotted down, I want to jump back a little bit about the Boy Scouts.
Yeah,
I know,
definitely.
I don't know if the Slavic community ever had anybody in the Boy Scouts, but I understand the importance of it. And maybe you can talk a little bit about what exactly is happening to the Boy Scouts. And I think it's a big deal. And how big of a problem that is.
Yeah.
I feel like you want to ask something else. Well,
the Slavic community has a pretty bad taste because our version of Boy Scouts was called Pioneers.
Yeah.
It was just a huge propaganda.
I was going to say,
had nothing to do with making fires.
Right.
When I was a kid, we didn't exchange. We actually had Russian Boy Scouts come over. And they had like pictures of them like jumping out of airplanes and shooting AK-47s. And I was like, this is pretty cool. It sounded cool to me, as a little kid.
It was a huge propaganda push for just to filtering people out for future positions.
It was like pre-military, right? Basically, yeah. No, Boy Scouts was. I mean, it was great for me. We had Cub Scouts when you were really little, and then the Boy Scouts helped. Run. They got a little bit of responsibility helping to train the Cub Scouts, which was good for I think everybody. But it was a great organization, and there was a huge scouting community. This is how I got up. This is how I got all over the Northwest as a kid. A huge scouting community in the area. A bunch of different great Boy Scout camps that are still. I think some of them have been shut down because of legal problems that Boy Scouts are having. But it's the principles of Boy Scouts I think are really solid. I mean, it started by the Brits because Baden-Powell was a British general who realized. I mean, there's a paramilitary band there, but he did realize at some point that the boys in his society were getting soft. And when he would get these kids in the military, he was like, man, these guys they don't go outside. They're not tough. They're not robust. They're sensitive. And this is back in like the 1900s. So God only knows.
No video games.
God only knows what he expected. Yeah. If he came back now, he'd be like, whoa, you guys need Boy Scouts like right now.
Yeah.
But I just think it was a great opportunity just to grow as a leader, but then also really just to get boys out in the woods, away from the city, because boys especially, and even young men to a certain extent, there's just a lot of energy you got to put in a good. If you don't put it in a positive direction, it's going to go in a negative direction, and that's what I think we're seeing right now in our society. And Boy Scouts was just one thing, but sports are another one too. What's happened lately, I think, with sports, and it's just gotten like either overregulated, or a lot of these contact sports have gotten taken away from young men. And I understand in football, there's issues of head trauma and all that, so you got to be safe. But it seems like all these different traditional pillars of masculinity are places where boys could go to forge character and get some responsibility. It's like one door after another is closing for them, and they're getting put. It's like, well, then, but why don't you just play a video game? Why don't you just
it's
get
so
on
interesting
TikTok?
because in the Slavic community, Andrei Ivanov, probably heard of Flash Love.
Definitely.
They're kind of supplementing maybe that sense because they have a boot camp literally for
Yeah.
boys, and I think they have a girls branch now.
I know
too.
there's other American organizations that are starting that is an alternative to Boy Scout that doesn't have all that woke stuff that's starting to seep into the Boy Scouts, Boys and Girl Scouts.
Yeah, I've met Andre once, and I've seen a lot of the stuff he does on social media, which is great because he's just grabbing young men who don't have positive male influences, and he's
surprised. I went to a couple of their
them,
graduations, and it's like 1,000 people or something. It's big.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Well, one thing that we haven't talked about yet that's obviously I think has been a big influence on a lot what you do is I think 2017 you and your wife both served in the military, right?
Yep.
And then she passed away.
She did.
Maybe you can talk a little bit
Sure.
more about
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I was in the military for 20 years. The last tail end, I met my late wife. She was in the military as well. So she was a native New Yorker. She joined right after 9/11.
When was that?
Right after 9/11. So her father and her uncle were both Ground Zero first responders. Father was a New York State trooper. Uncle was a firefighter. And so her and her brother, who's a year younger than her, they both did what a lot of Americans did. They went and they said, okay, we just got attacked, like I'm going. And so they both enlisted. Her brother went in the Marine Corps, he's still in. And my late wife, Shannon, she knew she had a knack for languages. She taught herself Spanish and French. And so she went to the recruiters.
Russian?
She could have. She took the test and they said, hey, you can learn Russian. But at the time, everybody wanted to learn. I mean, Arabic was the big push. So she said, I can learn Arabic.
So she learned it?
Yeah, she did. She learned Arabic. She learned it very well. She's one of these people that can just pick up languages. If you dropped her off in Russia, she would have been fluent. She learning local slang was like her thing. So she ended up deploying quite a bit, and because of her language ability, she got put on the front lines before women were really allowed on the front lines. So by the time we met, she had been to Iraq, she had been to Afghanistan.
So you met before 9/11?
What's that?
You guys met before 9/11?
No.
Okay.
We didn't meet until we really didn't meet until 2013. I mean,
okay.
we met each other once before in Baghdad for like 10 minutes, and then we got put in the same unit in 2013. Fell in love, got married, and all that. She had been deployed a bunch before, and then so in 2018 she was deployed to go take out, as part of the task force that went and took out the last remnants of ISIS in Syria. And so when Trump came on the scene, ISIS had taken over like 3 different countries, and Obama was like, well, it's just going to take a long time, and Trump was like, well, that's nonsense. Like let's get everything we need to the Middle East to go take out ISIS, and then let's get the heck out of there. And so she was over there when we took out the last village that ISIS controlled in Syria in 2018. December of 2018. And that's when Trump sent out the famous tweet, the famous message. He was like, okay, we took out the caliphate. We took away all the ground they controlled. Now we're getting our troops out of Syria. At the time, I don't think even Trump realized this, but there had been a big push ever since the Syrian civil war started to get more involved by permanent Washington, D.C. Republicans and Democrats that were like, okay, well, now we can get rid of Assad. We can do one more. There's always one more country to invade with these people. And so when Trump said that he wanted to get our troops out of Syria because they had met the mission, and this is Trump keeping a promise. He said on the campaign trail, like, we're gonna take out ISIS, but I'm done having us go to war, in these foreign countries where we have no business. And so when Trump announced that, that's when Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis and a bunch of other unelected bureaucrats basically said, we know what's best for the country. People who were never elected by anybody. And they committed bureaucratic slow roll. Mattis ends up publicly resigning. They were supposed to be out of Syria by Christmas Eve of 2018. And so they ended up staying. And then on just a month later, about a month after the order was given, her and 3 other Americans were killed just by a suicide bomber. So that's when I had actually just retired from the military. I'd started working in the CIA as a paramilitary guy. I was actually deployed at the same time. I wasn't in Syria, but I was in Northern Africa. Flew home and said, okay, I can't do this for a living anymore. We had 2 young sons, so I really just wanted to move back here and put my kids first. But I had an opportunity to meet President Trump in person because he's a good commander-in-chief and he actually cares. He flew out there to meet all the families who had just lost a loved one, and I got to meet him one-on-one, and I just basically said, thanks for being here. I appreciate that. But also you need to know that you're getting the foreign policy right. Because this is when the media was really attacking Trump. They're like, this guy doesn't understand how the world works. He doesn't understand foreign policy.
I don't think they ever stopped. It was just
they never stopped.
Onslaught from day one.
It was onslaught. Yeah, never. And it's still to this day, they're like, well, Trump didn't know what he was doing with war. It's like, well, look at the world now. But I also wanted to make it clear to him, and I was pretty sure he knew this, but I basically just wanted to get it off my chest. I was like, you're being undermined at the mid to senior levels in a way that I had never seen. Because I came in the Army under Clinton, sort of all through Bush, Obama. I didn't vote for Obama. Most of my friends in the military, pretty conservative, didn't vote for Obama. But we all worked for him because he was a commander-in-chief. When Trump came in, it was like a night and day difference. And I saw this in the military and I saw it in the CIA. You had senior level leaders who were just like, well, Trump doesn't know what he's doing and we're in charge. And I'm like, well, that's not the Constitution. Like that's not what we're supposed to be doing. And ultimately that hubris cost my wife her life. So I told that to President Trump and I thought nothing else would come from that. But I got an opportunity to go back a couple weeks later, and because one of his advisors called me up and said, hey, we don't know what you said to the boss, but he wants to hear more of it. Like, can you come back out? Because Trump wanted ground truth from people, which was really unique. I think it gave him a really unique perspective.
I want to take a moment to thank all of our sponsors for allowing us to be here on this program and all of our future programs. Some of the sponsors are Pilmeni, Nina Martina, a real estate broker, America's Best Realty, Exceptional Homes, Dream House Construction, Imperial Cabinets, Solution 8020, Gold Cup Coffee House, Red Hills Construction, Ciberoni, Lanos Floral, Third House Media, and some others. Without these companies, without these organizations, we couldn't be on this program. And if you would like to be our next sponsor, reach out to us by visiting slavicvote.org. We would love to partner with you and further our mission. Thank you very much. Obviously, one thing that's going on right now, and as someone who has served in the military, everything that's going on in the Ukraine war and Ukraine and Russia, we don't really take a position because we're here in the United States. But I would love to hear your insight. I know that's been some of the questions that were asked on social media to talk to you has been about that a little bit.
Sure.
And why you have a position that you do. And then if you want to speak a little bit about that, your position and kind of what you think
definitely
is going on and from the military perspective.
Certainly. So obviously Putin's in the wrong. You don't invade other countries and start killing people.
Right.
I mean, it's hard to defend his position there. As from an American perspective, I don't think we have a position right now to go over there and do anything but cause more harm, especially what we're doing right now. The reason why Putin's emboldened to do this is because America is weak right now. Yeah. The reason why Putin can afford this is because we killed off the U.S. energy sector, and then we actually greenlit the pipeline that just mysteriously blew up. We greenlit the NORAD 2. Trump was using diplomatic strength to block that, and he was able to go to the Europeans and say, "Hey, don't come crying to me about Putin when you're buying all your oil from him. When you're lining his coffers, don't come crying to me about Russian aggression and how much more support you need, and you're going to complain that we're pulling troops out of Europe. Stop buying oil from him. It's really easy. Buy some of ours." And Trump flooded the market with cheap U.S. petro, which that really hurt Putin's bottom line. I mean, yeah, there's all the personality things where Putin didn't know what Trump was going to do. But at the end of the day, Putin really just couldn't afford it. If you look at when Putin took Crimea in 2014, that's when Obama was really killing U.S. energy industry as well. You know, he was driving down our oil supply, which made Putin's commodities go up. So he had the resources to do it. And so we put ourselves in, and then the Afghanistan withdrawal, Putin saw that. So it's like, okay, he's got the money to do it because of our foolish policies. And then also he saw how Biden handled Afghanistan. He's like, okay, and he's been dealing with Biden for the last 50 years because the guy's been in government since he was, a baby. So Putin has the ability to go do it, and the next thing you know, we don't immediately move and say, okay, hey, let's stop this. Let's come to the negotiating table. I think that should have been step number one, where we say, hey, Putin, if you continue to do this, here's what's going to happen. We're going to throw these sanctions at you, but we want to give you an off ramp. And the same thing, let's get Zelensky, let's get everybody in here, and let's have a conversation so that this doesn't go nuclear, because this conflict could go nuclear. All these states that were former Soviet satellites on the Russian border, historically, they've always been a place where if conflict gets there, we slow down. And we say, hey, because people have nuclear weapons pointed at each other. Like Russia has nuclear weapons pointed at Europe, we have nuclear weapons pointed at them. We fought the entire Cold War through our economy and through diplomatic channels. Yep. Yeah, there were some proxy wars in Vietnam, Korea, and all that. But anytime I got close to anybody's border, Russia or America's, we stopped. Like a Cuban Missile Crisis. There was a lot of back channel communication that went on there. But right now, we're not doing any of that. We've just taken this very, very, I think, blind position that sounds good on paper. Hey, we're supporting a democracy. That sounds great. We all love democracies here in America. But my number one question is, how many times have we heard this? We always hear that these people somewhere are starving for democracy. Therefore, we need to send billions of dollars and potentially our own blood and treasure. So I have a problem with that. But then also for us to just take billions of dollars, give it to Zelensky with no conditions whatsoever and no accountability. We asked for it to be accounted for, and now we're seeing reports that only like 30% of it's making it to the front lines. Then you got to ask yourself, okay, what's Zelensky's incentive for de-escalating this? He doesn't really have one. We're just continuing to give him, every time he turns around and says, I need more money, we give him more money. There's no one's being pressured one way or another to get to the negotiating table. And look, the rhetoric coming from the U.S. is just completely irresponsible. Biden is saying Putin cannot remain in power. He's using regime change language. So he's saying the same things that we said about Saddam, that we said about Gaddafi. And so if you're Putin, you just got thrown off a SWIFT system, your assets are getting frozen, your pipeline just got blown up, and you have the U.S. president saying, well, this guy can't remain in power. You have members of Congress who are authorizing this money that are saying, well, we're at war with Russia. It's like, well, wait a sec, we didn't vote on a war with Russia. Like, that rhetoric is just completely and totally ridiculous, and it's dangerous. And then we're bragging, we have our intelligence community bragging that, hey, we're providing targeting data to kill Russian generals. Okay, so now we're admitting that we're killing Russians, and I'm not saying like, Russians. I'm not saying that the Russian soldiers that are there on the ground are like the greatest people in the world, but they're soldiers following orders. And when we start using our targeting guidance and our weapon systems, at what point does Putin just say, well, we're at war here? And if you zoom a little bit even further out, we thought our economy was strong enough to really crush Russia's economy. But because of what Biden has done to our economy, especially on the energy sector, when we threw all those sanctions at Russia, number one, a lot of Europe didn't come along with us because they were like, well, we still like that Russian oil. But then number two, we played right into China's hands, because China's always wanted to be able to challenge our status as the reserve currency holder. They've always wanted to attack the dollar, and they're doing a good job at it. But China was right there with Russia. to say, hey, we will underwrite all of this. We have our own banking system that you guys can be a part of now. And Biden at the same time is trying to get back in that Iran deal. So the Chinese then went to the Saudis and all those Arab countries that were mad at Iran that Trump brought into a negotiation deal. And they said, hey, can we start buying your oil without the U.S. dollar? Can we use the yuan or can we use gold? And so now we're starting to kill off the U.S. petrodollar as well as a result. And we did something very, very dangerous. We unified Russia and we unified China into an alliance. Now, when we fought the Cold War, we had a couple different doctrines. It was never to push NATO up onto the border with Russia because that would provoke Russia, but also divide China and Russia, because if China and Russia are combined, just look at that on the map. That's like half the world. That's the Eurasian landmass.
Well, they have the BRICS nations now. It includes like Brazil and then India.
Right.
And it's just
and so we've created this
shot ourselves in the foot.
This economic behemoth over there. And so I think obviously in a minute, a misunderstanding between what Putin what Putin interprets from our escalation could result in a nuclear war. That's my number one concern, especially when we go and blow up his pipeline, or someone went and blew up his pipeline. We're getting blamed for it, so I think that's probably all that matters. But then number two, we're continuing to send billions of dollars over there. Governments in Europe are collapsing under the weight of this, and China is just sitting there waiting to make their moves. And my fear is that they will just continue to move countries in that sphere of influence off of the dollar system onto the yuan system. And at some point, even though we also rely on China to buy up our debt bonds, China's to say, well, we're not buying your debt bonds from you anymore. And we're going to start saying that half the world is on the yuan now, they're not on the dollar. Then our economy's done, because that's really all we have is the fact that we're the primary.
We can't export inflation anymore.
Right.
Yeah. So for me, everything is it's de-escalation, and then also there's just the very real, how much can we help other countries when our country's in this way? When our southern border is wide open, and there's 4 million illegal immigrants that have come into our country. There's enough fentanyl coming into our country to kill every American 3 or 4 times over. The DEA just released a bulletin from Multnomah County that says there's fentanyl shaped as lollipops and Skittles targeting children. If we're not taking care of that, how are we sending just today? I mean, the Senate authorized sending $12.6 billion to Ukraine, and we can't account for 70% of that. That's just going to go to Zelensky and some guys. That's not putting the American people first. So that's right. Yeah, it's a horribly complex issue. I just think we need a lot more nuance and a lot more, I think, big picture thinking. And for God's sakes, people have nuclear weapons pointed at each other. Let's be much more careful.
Right. Have you gotten any kind of negative feedback from the Slavic community or the Ukrainian community, just about your position?
To be honest, I haven't.
Interesting.
I talked to Ukrainian folks and folks. I mean, it's a huge Slavic community, especially if you're in Vancouver. Yeah. Any of my events, I get people that come there. I had a couple of gentlemen that came to the debate, and we had this. My Democrat opponent's position is just send unlimited amounts of money to Ukraine. But I had some guys there who said they were from Russia. One of them said he was born in Kiev, and they said, we appreciate the fact that you're saying what you're saying, because it's not black and white like it's getting portrayed in the media.
Right. Well, you mentioned your opponent. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your opponent, kind of the differences between the two of you, and
certainly.
Speak a little bit about before that, can you please explain what you're running for? Which position, what it covers?
Sure.
That's right. Why this specific position? Would be really.
So I'm running for Washington's 3rd Congressional District, so right across the river from where we're sitting. So basically Vancouver, Clark County, Wahkiakum County, Pacific County, all the way out to the Pacific Ocean, and then Cowlitz, Thurston, Lewis County, and then Skamania out in the gorge. So big. That's big. Really big district. Yeah, so running for federal Congress. Who are you
going to be replacing for the...
So I will be replacing Jamie Hura Butler. I already beat her in the Republican primary. So she is one of the Republicans who voted for Trump's impeachment. So that's really what got me into politics.
I was about 10, I think. 10 of them.
One of the 10. Yeah, and we got rid of pretty much all of them except for 1 or 2.
8 out of 10.
8 out of 10. Not bad. Yeah. Yeah. So took her out, and now it's me versus a Democrat. And so my Democrat is basically running. She's doing 2 things. She's trying to present herself sort of like Biden did in 2020, where she's saying, hey, these Trump guys, these America First people, they're crazy. And I am just a return to normalcy. I'm very moderate. But then she backs every single Democrat policy that we're seeing right now. So the first question we were asked in the debate, I have it up on my Instagram, it's what would you do about inflation? And she just attacks me the entire time. The word inflation or energy doesn't come out of her mouth the entire time, because they can't talk about that, because the Democrats Democrat policy right now on energy is to force us into this green system, kill off U.S. energy, and they don't care how much gas costs. And right now, that cycle of inflation is going to cost every American 1 month of pay. Like, you're going to work for 1 month for free, essentially, just to pay inflation. And the Democrats, they own that. That's all them. Day one, Biden killed off Keystone XL. He stopped issuing exploratory permits, and now we have this, at our feet with energy. And then same thing with all this spending. I mean, the Democrats are spending trillions of dollars. They're trying to force through this continuing resolution that's going to give them a couple, billions and billions more money of discretionary spending. She doesn't want to talk about that. She can't talk about that. She hasn't said that she has any other plan. She's just going to vote right along with Nancy Pelosi in the Congress. And then same thing with crime. The crime that we're seeing right now, our open southern border that we talked about, all the way to the crime in Portland and the crime in Vancouver, that's coming from Salem and that's coming from Olympia. And these are all Democrat policies. I mean, she's endorsed by Monica Stonier. She's endorsed by Sharon Wiley. And those are two state legislators in Vancouver who signed.
Did Monica run for that position before?
I think she, like a long time ago, a while back. Yeah. So both of them sponsored the bill that Inslee signed, who's also supporting her, that is going to eliminate the 3 strikes and you're outlaw. And so now we're getting ready to let go violent criminals out of jail, to include a guy who killed a 14-year-old girl a couple years ago. They're going to let him out of jail because some of the felonies he committed before that were committed in different states. And so they're going to let him out. And so this decriminalization of actual crime, this is all the Democrats. So from the federal level, unsecure southern border, all the way to what's happening in the state legislatures, and that has resulted in all this crime. That's all in the Democrats. And we talked a good deal about crime at the debate, and all she did was attack me and say that I have issues with the way the FBI has been conducting themselves lately, which is a whole different topic. But she's lock, stock, and barrel on board with what the Democrats are pushing as far as law and order goes. And then the same thing with our schools. I know education is near and dear to everybody who has kids, and she is part of the Planned Parenthood. She wants federal funding to go to Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood are the ones that run comprehensive sex ed, the so-called gender-affirming care for minors, which is just mutilation and castration of kids without their parents' consent in many cases here in Washington State. And she won't disavow that. As a matter of fact, she says taxpayers should pay for that. I'm pro-life. She's pro-choice, but her pro-choice is extremely. It's very radical, but it's also where the Democrat Party is right now. Like 10, 15 years ago, when the Democrats would talk about abortion, if you go back and you listen to Obama as a candidate in 2007, he was fairly moderate on abortion. He wasn't celebrating abortion. And now my opponent and the Democrats' stance on abortion is that abortion should be funded by the taxpayers up until the time the baby is born at the 9th month. And I think if you go talk to Americans, many of whom even consider themselves to be pro-choice, that position's even too radical for them.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think people realize, even in the Slavic community, that since we came here, like in the 90s, I think where the Democrats are, on their own side now, but the Republicans are roughly where the Democrats were about 20, 15 years ago. I mean, that's kind of... So saying that Republicans are extremists or something like that, it's kind of like, well, we were there. You guys were there 15 years ago. Right. The same.
I mean,
page,
especially when you talk about the border and illegal immigration. Yeah. I mean, you can pull up YouTube videos of Obama and Biden talking about building the wall. Yeah. But because Trump talked about it, they're like, no, we don't want a wall. We want immigration. Like it's unchecked illegal immigration.
So from the specific position that you're running for, what do you see to change, or what kind of policies do you think you can get to first, I guess, or vote on first? So
first, we're going to have, for the first 2 years we're in there, we're going to have to deal with Biden still being in the White House. Mm-hmm. So now normally I should say, like, I have all these different bills I want to pass, but the bottom line is Biden's not going to sign off on Republican bills. Yeah. So we're going into 2 years of conflict. And this is kind of like the American cycle, right? A political party gets power, and then by the midterms, everybody's mad at that political party. And the next party that comes in, at least in the Congress, they're the opposition party to that president, which does give us some form of a check and balance on one party dominating. And so we're going to go in there, and I think we're going to get a Republican majority, a red wave, just because of what the Democrats have done to the country. But our job is going to be to slam the brakes on the Biden agenda, And so we're not going to sign off on any more of these $1 trillion spending packages that are really just a payday for the Chinese Communist Party to convert us to the green energy. I think we really have to start playing hardball with the Democrats. Like what's happening right now with energy, with the cost at the pump, it's driving up all this. That's what's driving the inflation, and it's crushing the working class right now at the grocery store, at the pump, et cetera. So I do think we have to say to Biden, like, you either are going to turn back on U.S. energy or we're not going to fund the federal government. These are the biggest tool that we have from the congressional perspective is the budget. We control the purse strings. And so we can start making ultimatums like that will at least get us to the negotiating table. Like, I don't think Biden's going to be like, well, okay, I'll give you guys exactly what you want. It's like, well, let's have a conversation. What can we do right now to start fighting for the American people? I think that's essential. I also believe, and some people don't like to hear this, but I think Biden has met the standards of high crimes and misdemeanors. And so I think he should be impeached for opening up the invasion on the southern border, for leaving Americans on the battlefield in Afghanistan, all the corruption that's been uncovered from the Hunter Biden laptop. I think we have grounds to impeach him. And many members of his administration right now that are acting in a very corrupt way. I think we have to start holding these people accountable, especially the unelected bureaucrats in the administration, because we've developed this fourth branch of government that is the people that are in all these different powerful agencies. Fauci's just like, I think, the best example. You have this guy who was able to start funding gain-of-function research in China, and no one in the government knew what the heck he was doing. And anytime we go to question the guy, he's able to tap dance his way out of that. Well, there's a lot of Fauci's throughout the federal government, and I think we have to start going after them and holding them accountable.
Yeah, I mean, I think at one of the meetings we spoke to an auditor he was running for Washington auditor.
Yeah.
The stuff he was telling us was just
Brett
like...
Simpson.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Brett's a wealth of knowledge. Yeah, he is. Yeah.
I think he just had a debate as well, and then he did very, very well.
I'm sure. Yeah, he's smart, very smart guy.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I want to be able to provide the top federal level effort with election integrity. I mean, look, 2020, we can go on that forever, but there's a lot of Americans right now, Republicans and independents, who don't trust our election system. And I think that's very dangerous. I think this is probably something that the Slavic community, or really any immigrant community, has a greater understanding than native-born Americans. Like, we have something very special here where we get to pick the people that have power over us. But when that trust starts to fray in that system, like, human nature will take over and people will start acting in a very violent, scary way. So I think the most important thing for us to do, just lay out what happened once and for all. Right. And so I think we can do that from the floor of Congress at the federal level. And
learn from it,
and learn from it. Exactly. Right.
Well, as we segue out into the outro of our program, I wanted to kind of touch on that as well.
Yeah.
Because election integrity is important. I know as we get close to the election, a lot of Slavic community is, for a long time we were didn't believe in the elections.
There was no integrity at all.
Right. And I think a lot of Slavic people started finding, okay, we can do this. We can see the difference. We can vote. And obviously 2020 came, and it felt like we made a step backwards. So we have to continue encouraging them. Maybe it's not perfect as you like it to be.
Right.
But it's not the answer is not to give up and just let it go.
Exactly.
The answer is to get out and vote.
Amen.
And vote better and harder than ever before.
Yep.
So speaking on that a little bit and encourage the community why it's important to get out and vote for this position or in general for this election. And just the importance of our vote right now.
Just to vote, because if you don't vote, here's the thing: the people who want unlimited crime at your doorsteps, who want to keep driving this inflation, who want to sexualize your children in school, they're all going to go vote, and then they're going to get power. And the most compelling case that those guys can make is they can continue to tell us, subversively, that, oh yeah, the elections are all rigged, because then they don't really even have to cheat or steal them. If they get 15, 20% of conservatives just not to vote at all, they win just by sheer demoralization of us. But if we turn out and we vote in numbers, then we take our country back. Because I think your average American who works hard every day and loves their family, they share values with us. They might not go out there and say, I love President Trump, I love the Republicans. They might not say that. But when we lay out what our policies are, they're going to vote for us. So don't fall for the hype. You've got to, if you want to change it, and I think most people do, then you've actually got to get out there and vote. I think that's the most important thing. You got to make sure your friends and your relatives and your neighbors, they're registered to vote. They have a plan to vote. It's Washington and Oregon make it very easy with the mail-out ballots. I don't like the mail-out ballots. I want us to move to a place where we show our ID and we vote in person. It's counted in front of everybody. But right now, you really don't have an excuse for not voting. Like, you can literally register on your phone in like 5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you for one thing that I love about you. You don't censor yourself, or at least you don't say you just say how it is.
Yeah.
And you're not scared for the backlash. And I'm sure you've gotten a lot of it already.
Yeah.
So thank you for speaking out and speaking for a lot of people who might either be afraid or can't speak out. We appreciate it. Where can people find more information about you?
Definitely. JoeKentForCongress.com is the best place. All links to all my social media are on there. I'm doing a town hall or a public event pretty much every day between now and November 8th. So JoeKentForCongress.com under the events tab and on all my social media. We'll put that all out. At my town halls, you can come ask any questions you want, either publicly, or if you don't want to ask publicly, we can have a private conversation. And I like to be as transparent as possible, as you can see. Yeah.
Where are those town halls? Okay.
So we're doing them all over the district. We are concentrating heavily in Clark County because that's our biggest density of population. But if you live out somewhere in Pacific County, Thurston County, like, we're going to come to you as well. So we're in all the counties pretty consistently.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. And last question, we have like a couple minutes left. Sure. When was the first time you felt like, I know you mentioned impeachment was kind of the deciding factor of President Trump. Was that the deciding factor, or was there before that? When did you decide to finally run for office?
When she voted for impeachment, I had been offered a job in a second Trump administration, and then we watched the saga with the election go down. So I figured that wasn't going to happen. When she voted for impeachment, I was like, okay, well, I'm a national security guy. I know that realm. I worked on the Trump 2020 campaign, so I'd done some public speaking here and there, but I wasn't proficient at it at all. So I started calling around to all the different Republican offices, and I was like, okay, she just voted for impeachment. Who are we getting behind? Who's the person? And everybody was mad, but there was no plan. And so for me, I was like, well, that's a sign, like this is, I've made some contacts in the media. I've made some contacts in Trump's world. I have all this other life experience. I have 2 sons who the future of the country, it's theirs. I have to be a good steward of it. I can't just sit here and be mad about it on social media. So for me, I was like, well, I have no idea what I'm doing. I had to Google, how do you run for Congress? But ever since then, it was like, let's just go for it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, kind of like us, we were like, we need to, who's going to get the community out and voting? And if nobody else, I guess we'll just have to do it.
That's right.
We just have to do it. So I love that. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Our time is over, unfortunately. If you have anything else to say you want to the community, the camera is yours. You have the last couple minutes left. You can say whatever you feel that's on your heart.
Yeah, I'm Joe Kent, running for Congress. I'd be honored to have your vote. Come ask me hard questions, JoeKentForCongress.com. That's a list of all of our different town halls there. But bottom line, make sure you're registered to vote. Make sure you have a plan to vote by November 8th. Thank you very much, and God bless.
All right. Yaroslav, do you have anything else to add?
Good.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for tuning into this program. We are just under 40 days away from the election. So if you are listening to this and you don't know if you're registered or not, visit our website. You can find all the resources on there. We're going to have our ballot workshops, and we're going to have our voter guide available just in a couple of weeks. So if you get that ballot and you need some support, visit our website. Here in Oregon, we're partnering with Oregon Family Council. So we will translate that material. We'll have it sent to all the churches in the area, all the Russian stores, all the areas where there's a Slavic community. We will get that information to you so it's accessible. There's no more excuses of why you can't vote, why you shouldn't vote. So you should be able to just do that. And again, visit our website. You can find all of our programming on our website, on our YouTube page. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like all of our videos. And if you want to jump on and volunteer with us, if you want to get involved with our organization, Joe Kent's, you can always reach out and we can definitely connect. But thank you for tuning in. Slavic Family, thank you for having us. We'll be back next week with more good guests. And have a great rest of the evening. Have a good day. Thank you for tuning in to Slavic Vote Live. We really appreciate you listening to this program. Don't forget to click that like button, subscribe, and share this program with your friends and family. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Кандидаты, стремления. Новая программа Slavic Vote Live. Каждую неделю в прямом эфире. Slavic Vote Live.